know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gail Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk exposes fake conspiracy theories created for the 1955 Brushy Bill Roberts hoax book, alias Billy the Kid. The information is from my book, Cracking the Billy the Kid Imposter Hoax of Brushy Bill Roberts. By the time Brushy Bill Roberts' 1955 hoax book, alias Billy the Kid, gets to its chapter titled In Black and White, its writer, English teacher C.L. Sonneshin, and co-author, hoax mastermind, and salesman WilliamVMorrison had tried many angles to trick readers that Brushy was Billy the Kid. They'd made up that his 1950 pardon hearing declaring him an imposter was unfair. They'd claimed that his autobiographical chapter proved his special knowledge as Billy the Kid, though he only made fatal errors from parroted sources, name-dropped, and confabulated. They'd offered so-called evidence, but it was just hearsay, lies, and fake affidavits. For in Black and White, they took on the coroner's jury report proving Billy the Kid had been shot dead on July 14, 1881. That report obviously imperiled Brushy Bill's imposter hoax as much as his being under 2 years old at Billy's killing. Their approach was making up conspiracy theories to deny the report's authenticity. Conspirators for Sonneshin and Morrison were the acknowledged killer Pat Garrett, those processing his reward payment, and historians. But Sonneshin's and Morrison's evidence was just fakery about 3 documents confirming Billy the Kid's killing. Desperation drove this high-risk lying because the 3 documents are not only cited in footnotes, but also reproduced in full in small print in the appendix. That risked any reader checking them and discovering Sonneshin's and Morrison's deceptions. That meant Sonneshin and Morrison scornfully bet that readers would skip the small print and just accept their word. The first document is Billy Bonney's July 15, 1881 coroner's jury report. It directly proved the killing. The next 2 documents were indirect proof since they granted Pat Garrett's reward based on that report. Those 2 documents are Acting Governor William Rich's July 21, 1881 entry in the Executive Record Book about processing Garrett's reward request and the February 18, 1882 Legislative Act granting the reward. As to the coroner's jury report, Sonneshin and Morrison knew they couldn't get away with misstating its contents. The public got them right on the day of Brushy's pardon hearing disaster. the November 30th, 1950 Alamogordo News had announced on its front page, Sumner jury thought the kid had been killed. It stated, although the perennial controversy over whether the infamous Billy the Kid still lives has again arisen, George Abbott of Alamogordo has in his office at the Pioneer Abstract Company a photostatic copy of the verdict of the coroner's jury which viewed the remains of the late William Bonney. Some 20 years ago, when the late Harold Abbott, brother of George, was an employee of the State Land Office in Santa Fe, he, with other employees, were going over some old records in the basement of the state capitol. There they ran across, in the San Miguel Court records, the original copy of the coroner's jury, dated July 15th, 1881, and written in Spanish. The document covered 3 pages, of which they made photostatic copies. As the reader will see from the document translated below, the 6 men serving on the jury and the justice of the peace who impaneled them seemed convinced that William Bonney, known as Kid, was quite dead, and that he had been killed by Pat Garrett. The next year, the public got the report again. On August 5th, 1951, 19 years after Harold Abbott's find, historian Maurice Garland Fulton relocated the report to refute Morrison and Sonneshan, then writing brushy backing alias Billy the Kid. Fulton published an article in the El Paso Times titled, Coroner's Report Proves Billy the Kid is Dead. Historian asserts, researcher discovers document. It had Fulton's photostatic copy of the report, which matched the Harold Abbott copy. Fulton wrote, we are lucky to have a report in this instance, for coroner's jury reports are hard to find, even when they happen to have been made. He donated a copy to the Indiana Historical Society's Lew Wallace collection, certifying each of its 3 pages on January 18, 1951 on their back to counter the ploy Morrison was then using of claiming Garrett hadn't certified the report, so it wasn't real, though certification was a modern procedure swearing a copy matched an original and wasn't used in Garrett's day. Additionally, on May 2, 1951, historian Robert N. Mullen had sent Morrison a copy of the report, to which Morrison answered with stilted fakery, this will serve to acknowledge the receipt of the transcript copy of the purported coroner verdict in the case of Billy the Kid. The coroner's jury report was actually airtight proof of Billy's killing by its juryman's identification of his body, by Peter Maxwell's eyewitness account, and by its declaration of Garrett's self-defense homicide as deserving reward. And its recipient was known. Its writer, Fort Sumner's Justice of the Peace, Alejandro Segura, identified him as District Attorney William Breeden in Santa Fe. Breeden was the potential prosecutor for this high-profile killing, as well as the territorial attorney general. Breeden then backed Garrett's reward, convinced both of the killing and its being justifiable homicide. See Talk 36 on the coroner's jury report, linked below, as well as my book titled The Coroner's Jury Report of Billy the Kid. So, Morrison and Sonneshin simply ignored the report's fatal contents while pretending the report wasn't authentic. But Sonneshin and Morrison didn't hesitate to fake contents of the other two documents about Garrett's reward payment, Acting Governor Rich's entry and the Legislative Act. In reality, the entry of William Rich, standing in for traveling Governor Lionel Sheldon, even confirmed his having a copy of the report from Garrett while quoting Breeden's legal advice to delay payment until a legislative act converted the reward from Governor Wallace's private offer to a territorial reward. In reality, the legislative act then made the conversion and Garrett was paid. These realities forced Sonneshin and Morrison to lie that 74 years of conspiracies by Garrett, Rich, the legislature, and historians from the killing day to the 1955 publication of Alias Billy the Kid had hidden that the reward was granted without a coroner's jury report proving the killing of Billy the Kid. C.L. Sonneshin was an incompetent historian, but he took to conspiracy theorizing like a duck to water. He mixed Morrison's lies with his own, punctuated with sham outrage. Sonneshin used a multi-pronged attack. First, he made up a conspiracy of historians hiding that all Billy the Kid history was endowed. Next, he made up a conspiracy of Pat Garrett hiding his murder of Billy Barlow by forging the coroner's jury report. Then he made up that the legislature, conspiring with Pat Garrett and the Santa Fe Ring, hid that no report existed. Here's Sonneshin's fake conspiracy of historians. He called their writings, quote, rumor, hearsay, and legend. He announced that he and Morrison would instead use, quote, what had been set down in black and white regarding the wind-up of the kid's career. By in black and white, he meant written records. They were the coroner's jury report, the Rich entry, and the Legislative Act. Sonneshin wrote, Morrison found more and more indication that the Billy the Kid story had not been well and truly told. That eventually evolved into 21st century brushy hoaxer's soundbite, history is not as written. But Sonneshin faked evidence for history being not well and truly told. He declared that Billy wasn't a child murderer in Silver City, according to a March 22, 1932 Silver City Independent article about historian Robert Mullen discovering that Billy had only robbed a Chinaman and was put in jail. In reality, Sonneshin just lifted Pat Garrett's fiction in his 1882 book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. It wasn't the accepted history. Sonneshin added that Billy also didn't murder Buckshot Roberts, Mescalero Indian Agency clerk Morris Bernstein, or Jim Carlisle, though historians didn't claim that either. For filler, Sonneshin threw in irrelevantly that history itself wasn't fair, since Billy deserved the Lew Wallace pardon and was victimized by the Santa Fe Ring, the press, and the William Brady murder trial. He added the obvious, that Garrett's death warrant was useless after Billy's jailbreak. From this hogwash, Sonneshin leapt to his conspiracy theory. He concluded sarcastically.
What can be found in black and white about the shooting in Pete Maxwell's house leads to a most peculiar fact.
In capitals,
there is no actual proof of the death of Billy the Kid.
The upshot is that Sonneschen's conspiracy of historians had no evidence denying Billy the Kid's killing. Here's Sonneschen's fake lying Pat Garrett conspiracy. He floated that Garrett lied about killing Billy the Kid. But why would Garrett lie? Since there wasn't a reason and he didn't, Sonneschen made up that Garrett was a law-breaking scoundrel scrounging to get the reward. For evidence, he claimed Garrett went illegally to Fort Sumner in San Miguel County to kill Billy since, as sheriff of Lincoln County, he had no authority in San Miguel County and, quote,
stepped out of his own bailiwick.
Sonneschen then made up that Garrett should have turned Billy over to local sheriff Hilario Romero, but he didn't. In reality, Sonneschen was unaware that Garrett was made a deputy U.S. Marshal by the Secret Service in late 1880, so his bailiwick was all of New Mexico territory to capture or kill Billy. He wasn't beholden to Sheriff Romero. To be noted is that later brushy hoaxers, finally aware of the Secret Service, tried to fix up by denying the correctness of Garrett's deputy U.S. Marshal appointment by Operative Azariah Wild, by hiding that it was approved by Wild's boss, the head of the Secret Service, James Brooks. The upshot is Sonneschen's lying Pat Garrett conspiracy had no evidence. Morrison had used this bailiwick fakery in his December 3, 1953 El Paso Rotary Club talk with Sonneschen introducing him. It shows how Morrison and Sonneschen deceitfully leapt from making up Garrett's illegal presence to making up that he lied about the killing. Morrison stated, Garrett had made a trip into San Miguel County Sheriff Romero's jurisdiction in an attempt to capture the kid. Garrett's posse purportedly killed an unidentified man there, meaning Billy Barlow, in July or August 1881. But did they call in Sheriff Romero and turn the matter over to him? There's no legal evidence that they did. In fact, there is no legal evidence in San Miguel Court to prove they killed anyone at that time. Using these lies, Sonneschen and Morrison took the next step in their conspiracy mongering, the need for Garrett's covering up his murdering an innocent victim. Here's the fake Garrett as murderer cover-up conspiracy, whose punchline was that the accepted coroner's jury report was fake. Sonneschen and Morrison fabricated that Garrett covered up that his victim wasn't Billy by forging the report. Sonneschen put that report, which was actually the authentic one, in alias Billy the Kid's appendix, but titled it Report of the Coroner's Jury, translation of a photostat copy of a purported original which was never filed in San Miguel County. Sonneschen's evidence for a faked report used several conspiracy theories. He made up that there'd been 2 reports with no report actually filed. He made up that lack of a valid report made acting Governor Rich refuse the reward payment. He made up that the reward was paid by the legislature in collusion with Garrett's lawyer and the Santa Fe ring to hide that there had been no report or killing. Sonneshin pretended that all this conspiring was to hide that Brushy was surviving Billy. Here's the fake two reports conspiracy. Sonneshin made up that the accepted coroner's jury report wasn't real because the actual one got lost, and Garrett then forged the one historians called real. But Sonneshin's evidence is just old-timer malarkey from an AP Paco Anaya. Anaya was a teenage Fort Sumner friend of Billy's who in old age confabulated tales inserting himself into the history. Sonneshin's source was Anaya's April 2, 1936 letter to George Fitzpatrick, editor of New Mexico magazine. Fitzpatrick had sent it to Morrison on August of 1951 and to Sonneshin on January 19, 1952. Anaya had made up the two reports to pretend he was a juryman for a lost one, with Garrett then forging a second one. But dishonest Sonneshin hid that Anaya nevertheless confirmed Billy as the victim. Anaya had written, "Pat was in the room. He'd been asking where Billy was, when at this time Billy entered and Pat killed him." Furthermore, in 1991, the year of Sonneshin's death, Anaya's family published his manuscript as a book titled I Buried Billy. Repeat, I Buried Billy. In it, Anaya stated, "I, the writer, and my brother, Eugenio Garcia, and several others of those that were there, dressed Billy. Then we laid him on a high bed, and on the next day we buried him." But beyond confirming the killing, Anaya knew no history, as the rest of his fictional book proved. Sonneshin was back to his usual alias Billy the Kid tricks of claiming worthless sources as evidence, as well as faking their contents. The upshot is that Sonneshin's two reports conspiracy gave no evidence against the accepted coroner's jury report, and the conspiracy's creator, Paco Anaya, even confirmed Billy's killing. Here's the fake no filing in San Miguel County conspiracy. Sonneshin claimed no legitimate report ever existed because Morrison couldn't find it in San Miguel County records in Las Vegas, New Mexico. This built on Paco Anaya's fake two reports conspiracy. Sonneshin wrote,
"What happened to the second purported death certificate?" Garrett stated in his report, it was actually his July 15, 1881 letter, to the governor, it was actually acting Governor Rich, that he filed it with the district attorney of the 1st Judicial District. This should have meant that it was deposited in Las Vegas, the county seat of San Miguel County, but no such document could be found there.
Cited in alias Billy the Kid's appendix as evidence of non-filing were Morrison's requests for the report to the wrong locations. This no-filing conspiracy exposes Sonneshin's lying about obscure documents' contents to trick readers. In reality, Garrett didn't say in his July 15, 1881 letter to acting Governor Rich that he filed the report with, quote, the district attorney of the First Judicial District. Garrett wrote, I hereby annex a copy, repeat a copy, of the verdict rendered by the jury called in by the Justice of the Peace, ex officio coroner, the original of which is in the hands of the prosecuting attorney of the First Judicial District. So Garrett gave the location of the original report, not that he sent it himself. In reality, the report was sent to the prosecuting attorney of the First Judicial District, William Breeden, by the report's writer, Justice of the Peace Alejandro Segura. Segura addressed Breeden as its recipient in the report itself. Segura wrote, to the district attorney of the First Judicial District of the Territory of New Mexico, greetings. And sending the report to Breeden meant sending it to his Santa Fe office. Morrison's no-filing scam had pretended the report was filed with Alejandro Segura's other San Miguel County records in the county seat of Las Vegas. The upshot is that Sonishin's non-filing conspiracy gave no evidence that the report didn't exist. Key is that Sonishin and Morrison hid from readers that they knew that the report had actually been located in Santa Fe in 1932 and 1951 and photocopied both times. Here's the fake reward denial conspiracy. This began the indirect denial of the existence of the coroner's jury report by pretending that Garrett got his reward without the report or proof of the killing. To do this, Sonishin faked contents of acting Governor William Rich's July 21, 1881 executive record book entry, which was Rich's response to Pat Garrett's reward request, plus the quoted legal opinion of his consultant, Attorney General William Breeden. Recall that Rich's entry is both a footnote and quoted in full in the appendix. It makes Sonishin's lying about the entry astoundingly brazen. In fact, Rich confirmed in his entry that he had the report and he'd used the report to justify the reward. Rich wrote, also was presented a statement of the proceedings and verdict of a coroner's jury at Fort Sumner in San Miguel County upon the body of the said Bonnie, captured as aforesaid. To be recalled is that Pat Garrett had sent Rich a copy of the report in his July 15, 1881 reward request letter. Furthermore, Rich's quoted legal consultant, Breeden, had gotten the original report from its writer, Justice of the Peace Alejandro Segura. Despite the existence of the report being proved in the Rich entry, Sonishin lied that Garrett was denied the reward by Rich because of no report proving Billy the Kid was killed. Sonishin hissed snidely.
Then another curious thing happened. Acting Governor W.G. Rich would not validate Garrett's claim and refused to approve payment. As a result, Garrett never collected the $500 offered by Governor Wallace for apprehension of the kid.
Sonishin called that, quote,
turning down Pat's application.
In reality, Here's what Rich's entry stated. Believing, however, that Mr. Garrett has an equitable claim against the territory for said reward, the action at this office will simply be suspended until the case can properly be represented to the next legislative assembly. So Rich had simply delayed payment until a legislative act authorized it. There was no turning down of Pat's application. And Rich's delay had nothing to do with the coroner's jury report. Additionally, Sonneshin faked that, quote, the Attorney General advised against paying the reward. This is a lie by half-truth. In reality, Rich's entry quoted Attorney General Breeden as advising against immediate payment, not ultimate payment. Breeden recommended delay to await the legislative act's conversion of Lew Wallace's private reward offer to a territorial reward so Rich could properly pay Garrett with territorial funds. As quoted by Rich in his entry, Breeden stated, this certainly appears to be the personal offer of Governor Wallace, and it seems he did nothing to indicate that it was intended as an executive act on behalf of and to bind the territory. If the reward should be paid, it is very probable that the legislature would approve the payment if so desired, and that no objection would be raised, or that it will provide for its payment if it remained unpaid at the next session thereof. But if the governor, meaning acting Governor Rich, should now direct the payment of the claim, he would doubtless expose himself to the charge of misappropriation of the territorial funds. So Breeden's recommended delay had nothing to do with the coroner's jury report. As to Sonneshin's claim that Garrett never collected Wallace's $500 reward, he used trick wording since Garrett collected it from the legislature, not Wallace. In reality, Garrett did collect Wallace's reward indirectly after its territorial conversion by the legislature. Sonneshin also tried to beef up his reward denial conspiracy by pretending to catch Rich in a lie. Sonneshin claimed Rich wrote in the entry, there was no record whatever in this office or at the secretary's office of there having been a reward offered. Sonneshin sarcastically guffawed. This is truly amazing. Then he cited Rich's earlier executive record book entry dated December 13th, 1880, in which he had documented the reward. Then Sonneshin made up the reason he wanted for his fictional Rich lie. He wrote, one possible explanation for lying would be Rich's knowledge of the shaky character of the purported death certificate, meaning coroner's jury report, a document which cannot now be and perhaps never could have been produced. In reality, the liar was Sonneshin. The quote about no record wasn't Rich's. It was by quoted Breeden, who was merely confirming that the reward was obviously Wallace's private offer because he'd made no record of it as a territorial reward. That's why Breeden recommended the reward's legislative conversion to a territorial one. And Sonneshin had also lied about Rich's December 13th, 1880 entry. Rich wasn't hiding anything. His entry simply presented Wallace's private reward offer. That didn't contradict Breeden's conclusion that there was no record of a territorial offer. Here's the reality of Rich's entry. That December 13, 1880, he was Wallace's Secretary of State. Wallace had asked him to prepare the private reward in his name. Wallace had written, "Be good enough to prepare a draft of proclamation of reward $500 for the capture and delivery of William Bonney, alias the Kid, to the sheriff of the county of Lincoln County." Rich then wrote that draft in Wallace's name as his entry titled Reward. It stated, "Whereas William Bonney, alias the Kid, charged under indictment issued from the District Court in and for the County of Lincoln of the crime of murder committed in said county, and whereas the said William Bonney, alias the Kid, is a fugitive from justice, now therefore Lewis Wallace, Governor of the Territory, by virtue of the power and authority vested in me by law and believing the ends of justice will be served, thereby do hereby offer a reward of $500 for the apprehension and arrest of said William Bonney, alias the Kid, and for his delivery to the sheriff of Lincoln County at the county seat of said county." The upshot is that Sonneschen's reward denial conspiracy gave no evidence of acting Governor Rich's either refusing Pat Garrett's reward or having no coroner's jury report. Rich even cited having the report to justify his rewarding. And Sonneschen hid that on advice of Attorney General Breeden. Rich had simply delayed payment until a legislative act converting the reward from private to territorial funding. Here's the faked legislative reward payment conspiracy theory. Since Garrett was paid, Sonneschen and Morrison pretended payment was by corruption. They invented a convoluted fiction that Pat Garrett, his fictional attorney named Charles Green, and the Santa Fe Ring conspired to get around reward denying Rich by paying the reward through the Ring-controlled legislature without a coroner's jury report or proof of the killing of Billy the Kid. The February 18, 1882 Legislative Act is cited in a footnote and is even in the appendix in full. Morrison had originally fabricated an attorney Charles Green by lifting the name Charles Green from acting Governor Rich's July 21, 1881 executive record book entry. But Green wasn't Garrett's attorney. Green was the printer of the Santa Fe, New Mexican newspaper, from whom Rich got an affidavit swearing that he printed Lew Wallace's reward in the paper. Rich had used Green only to prove existence of the original reward offer, as Rich wrote in his July 21, 1881 entry. As evidence of said reward offer having been made, the affidavit of publication thereof, made by Charles H. Green, the editor and manager of the Daily New Mexican, was presented with said bill. Green had nothing to do with Garrett or the reward's payment. Morrison had used his attorney Green fiction to deny existence of the coroner's jury report. It's in his May 19, 1952 letter to historian J.W. Hendren. Hendren was one of the experts in Brushy's pardon hearing, declaring him an impostor. Nevertheless, Morrison still tried to convince him about Brushy. Morrison lied to him that Garrett's Ring attorney, Charles Green, forged the report to get Garrett's reward, then, quote, lobbied the legislature to grant it. That letter is in Sonishin's collected papers. Excerpted, Morrison wrote, "I will insist that Garrett employed a member of the Santa Fe ring to represent him in the matter of the reward. Mr. Green, editor of the Santa Fe New Mexican, publisher of official documents for the territory, acted as attorney for Garrett in the unsuccessful attempt to collect the reward from the governor." Note that the reward was successfully collected. Furthermore, I will say that Green used everything in his power to further Garrett's claim. I believe Green made, meaning forged, his purported coroner verdict upon which all of you are relying, meaning the accepted report, and which copy not certified failed to stand up. This is a lie. I do not believe the original verdict, meaning report, ever existed, in fact or in law, proof of which I can produce. This meant Morrison's fake attempt to find the report in wrong locations. The only logical conclusion would be that if an original verdict existed at the time, Mr. Green would have seen to it that all legal requirements would have been complied with, and he would have used it instead of resorting to the more expensive method of lobbying in the legislature to collect an amount that may not have defrayed the cost of the venture. Note that Morrison made up lobbying in the legislature for lack of a report. He hid the act's stated technicality of converting Wallace's private reward to a territorial one for payment, so there had been no cost to Garrett. But Sonishin, building on Morrison's Attorney Green lie, made up that Green, presumably on Garrett's behalf, submitted a copy of the report signed by Milner Rudolph and jurymen to the, quote, Secretary of the Territory on July 20th, 1881, a made-up date and event. This was Sonishin's faking that the real report, actually signed by the jurymen and jury president Milner Rudolph, was Green's forgery. Actually, Sonishin was just recycling A.P. Paco Anaya's malarkey of a second coroner's jury report forged by Garrett. Sonishin then extended the Green-Garrett conspiracy to the Santa Fe ring. He pretended that on one side were good guys, Rich and Wallace, who were, quote,
in opposition to the ring, so they did not want Garrett to get his money,
close quote. On the other side were ring members who, quote,
had been Murphy Dolan sympathizers opposed to McSween and Billy the Kid,
close quote. So they were the bad guys. Sonishin concluded this fiction writing,
the legislature was heavily loaded with ring supporters, so there was no trouble to get an act passed giving Garrett the money the governor had promised to pay.
In reality, Sonishin's Santa Fe ring conspiracy makes no sense. First, he was lying that Rich opposed the reward, since Rich backed it, writing in his July 21st, 1881 entry, believing, however, that Mr. Garrett has an equitable claim against the territory for said reward, the action of this office will simply be suspended until the case can be properly represented to the next legislative assembly. Second, Sonishin was lying about Wallace, since he wasn't even in the territory, having left in May of 1881. And Sonneshin was just name-dropping the Ring as corrupt politicians, which he lifted from Maurice Garland Fulton's note in the 1927 edition of Pat Garrett's book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid. In truth, Sonneshin, Morrison, and Brushy Bill were fatally ignorant of the Ring's part in Billy the Kid history. They didn't know about the anti-Ring regulators, or Billy's being a freedom fighter who testified repeatedly against Ringites, or that the Ring feared Billy as capable of instigating another anti-Ring uprising like the Lincoln County War. They didn't know that in 1880 the Ring brought in the Secret Service to get Billy captured or killed by Pat Garrett. In reality, if the Ring had assisted Garrett's reward, which wasn't necessary since it wasn't opposed, it would have been precisely because the coroner's jury report proved to them that their hated enemy, Billy Bonney, was dead at last. Worse, Sonneshin lied about the content of the legislative act. In reality, it made clear that payment delay was based on a technicality of converting Wallace's private reward to territorial funding. It stated, and whereas Pat Garrett was at the time sheriff of Lincoln County and did on or about the month of August 1881, in pursuance of the above reward and by virtue of a warrant placed in his hands for the purpose, attempted to arrest said William Bonney, and in said attempt did kill said William Bonney at Fort Sumner in the county of San Miguel in the territory of New Mexico. And wherefore said Garrett is justly entitled to the above reward, and payment whereof has been refused upon a technicality. Repeat, refused upon a technicality. Therefore, be it enacted by the Legislative Assembly of the Territory of New Mexico, the Territorial Auditor is hereby authorized to draw a warrant upon the Territorial Treasurer of the Territory of New Mexico in favor of Pat Garrett for the sum of $500 payable out of any funds in the Territorial Treasury in payment of the reward of $500 heretofore offered by His Excellency Governor Lew Wallace for the arrest of William Bonney, alias the Kid. The upshot is that Sonneshin's legislative reward payment conspiracy had no evidence of collusion of the legislature with Garrett and Attorney Green and the Santa Fe Ring to pay the reward without a coroner's jury report. On the contrary, payment had been delayed on the technicality of converting Wallace's private reward to a territorial reward because of certainty that the report was valid and the killing had occurred. Here's the fake Legislative Act August date conspiracy. Sonneshin and Morrison added to their legislative reward payment conspiracy by pretending the act used the wrong date for the killing because the legislature had no coroner's jury report giving a date. Sonneshin quoted the acts dating the killing to on or about the month of August 1881. He claimed that proved no killing occurred in July of 1881. In reality, the act merely used their day's legal convention of bracketing dates as on or about. Morrison originated this August date conspiracy by hiding the acts on or about to fake that it declared an August killing, which proved that Garrett had lied about a July killing in his forged coroner's jury report because there'd been no killing. That scam is in Morrison's August 8, 1952, Silver City Kiwanis Club talk titled, "He Said He Was Billy the Kid." Morrison stated, "Some of you are probably thinking that Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid on that certain July 14th, 1881, like his purported coroner's verdict said. Or you may think he was killed on that certain month of August, 1881, like the legislative act said he was killed. I know that Garrett never killed the kid on that certain July 14th, nor in that certain month of August, or at any other time. Billy the Kid was never killed by anyone." The upshot is that Sonishin's legislative act, August date, conspiracy had no evidence to deny the coroner's jury report or the killing. To be noted is that the rewards processing had actually further validated the coroner's jury report. On February 14, 1882, when New Mexico Territory Governor Lionel Sheldon had returned from traveling, he wrote to the legislature that he would have paid Pat Garrett outright. He stated, "It is a claim which I think I should have paid if it had not been understood that the matter was to be referred to the legislature before it came into my hands." But Sonishin ended his In Black and White chapter with a ridiculous lie that Garrett was rewarded without a coroner's jury report because no one had expected that Brushy Bill would turn up to prove that Billy the Kid hadn't been killed. In reality, proved in black and white was that Sonishin and Morrison had lied wildly about documents to create conspiracy theories to discredit the coroner's jury report, the fatal obstacle to their hoax. And Pat Garrett's rewarding, instead of proving their conspiracy theories, ended up getting the report and the killing confirmed by the acting governor, the attorney general, the legislature, and the governor. Nevertheless, Sonishin's and Morrison's conspiracy theories became gospel for duped Brushy believers and a template for later Brushy hoaxers. The talk to follow debunks the epilogue chapter in Alias Billy the Kid.